Here's your host, Alex Garrett.
All right. Well, here on the Alex Garrett Podcast Network, I have a very special guest on my line. You might know him as a college football star. He was, remind me of the school again, Ahmard Vital, but you've gone on to do college football and leadership and ministry, and you figured why not connect, and here we are. Thanks for joining my podcast today.
Hey, thanks you for having me on.
So I'm so glad that Pod Match connected us because your story and my love of sports, I feel like it's a great combination. I guess you did too. But let's start with the college and your owner of That Guy Media Group. Got to talk about that as well. But let's talk about college sports real quick because, as you know, I'm a big Notre Dame fan. So they're off to a great start. And you want to talk about other storylines this early season in college football, you know, because you are an analyst as well.
Yeah, I can. Thank you for having me on once again, man. We, I did come up in the college football. Obviously, I played college football at Stephen F. Austin back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Didn't quite work out well for me. I guess it started off pretty well. Walked onto the football team. 28 guys tried out. 2 of us made it. Me and a close brother of mine, we both made the squad. We won conference, won the Southland Conference in 1999. By 2000, 2001, I had to leave the team, financial reasons. But I was always a sports writer the whole time, especially once I came out of college. And so that leveraged me into doing some very interesting work. I worked at a community newspaper out here in Northwest Houston area. But I was very enamored with the college football recruiting process. So jumped on with Rivals and Scout.com and Fox Sports Southwest. And, you know, being the Texas recruiting analyst, there's not a university in the country that doesn't want Texas athletes. And so me being in the middle of all of that stuff, residing in Houston, we had a guy in Dallas, we had a guy in East Texas, we had guys all over the place. But, you know, college football recruiting was awesome to me. So my love for college sports has always grown from that. And, you know, I love that aspect of the game. And I'm one of those kind of guys who actually loves college football a little bit more than the NFL. But I mean, I'm just a football junkie all around.
Well, what are your thoughts on that? Put on your analyst hat real fast, because obviously I was lucky enough to engineer the Texas versus Alabama game last week, and Texas, you know, they wanted that revenge and they got it, didn't they?
Yeah, that was an interesting game. Going all the way back, it's not going all the way back, but I remember the Colt McCoy national championship. That would have been, I think, when Mark Ingram was coming out of the NFL that year. Colt McCoy was coming out of the NFL that year. Marcel Darius, I think, was coming out there, who basically destroyed Colt McCoy's shoulder in that first quarter, and then Garrett Gilbert came in. But yeah, you know, the Alabama Texas kind of pseudo matchup has been one of those where, you know, Alabama's always been the big kid in the room, just for really college football as a whole. I don't think we can point to too many other programs outside of Alabama. Maybe you can throw, you probably could throw, you know, recently guys, schools like Clemson, obviously recently Georgia, and there's just a lot of teams that have kind of had that multiple run where you've won multiple titles in a particular era. But I mean, you look at what Nick Saban has done at Alabama, and maybe the way I look at it now is that Alabama is just very, very, very good and just not untouchable. Where there was a time when you just couldn't stop Alabama. Alabama had 3 or 4 backs who could just run through you at any given time. And obviously opening up to the passing games in recent years with, you know, guys like Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa, and, you know, even going all the way back to the his name escapes me. His name escapes me. But they used to show his girlfriend on TV all the time. And all those guys, you know, opening up the passing game.
The one that Brent Musburger was all over on TV, right?
Yes, that one, yes. I can't. His name escapes me. I can see his face, and I can't, because I know it's not. It wasn't McElroy, because that would have been a little older. But the idea that like Alabama's probably I would say probably in the last 10 to 15 years, I don't think you can point to any team that hasn't been more consistent, like year in and year out, where you're always in the conversation in Alabama. And so Texas obviously, you know, pulled in one of the Alabama, you know, descendants. And
I think you're referring to A.J. McCarron, by the way. I think that's
yes, that's the one. Thank you for filling that blank in for me. But, you know, to to kind of bring it home, obviously this was a game, last year, the missed sack and the late field goal is what put Alabama over the top. You almost knew that it was going to be a very good matchup because, obviously Texas has really been trying to regain footing really since the Mac Brown era. If you really want to be honest, as far as that's concerned, because even the back end of the Mac Brown era wasn't so great as well. But exciting game, and Texas looks like it's turned the corner on a lot of things, and really that starts with a culture.
I want to go to Stephen F. Austin for a minute. What have you been seeing from them? I mean, because they're your alma mater, because you played with them, did you still follow them years later?
I was going to the Piney Woods game. That's us versus Sam Houston. When I was in school, obviously us versus Sam Houston was a huge rivalry, and lo and behold, we were coming out on top of those. But I can say in recent years, Sam Houston has had the upper edge in the Southland Conference, and I think the conferences have moved around a lot since then. So even naming the Southland Conference because of all this realignment, even what used to be known as the FCS schools have made moves into larger conferences, the WAC and other places like that. Stephen F. Austin is looking at this point in time still trying to rebuild and get some footing back. It's just because, but I can say this, man, Sam Houston has been really dominant in the past 3 to 5 years, if not longer. So we've not quite lived up to what was going on when I was there back in the 99s and the 2000s, early 2000s. But, you always got to stick with your team through thick and thin. So we're going to make sure and definitely still rep our school no matter what. And I got my degree from there. So, I mean, I still love my school even during downtimes.
Well, your story is also one of adaptation because it seems like after football and after, unfortunately, your father passed, you mentioned in your bio that you actually ballooned, as you called it, to, I believe, 238 pounds. Now, for a guy who played football, that's kind of unusual to have that happen. But how did you make the turnaround? And tell us that whole story of really adapting to, losing your father, being out of football, and recovering from all of that.
Well, when I look back on it now, I realize the ballooning started on the back end of college. I mean, because when I was playing college football, I mean, 7% body fat, 5'9", 185, and I was, ripped, from top to bottom. And then once I stopped playing ball, you get, a girlfriend from East Texas, you start working at a sports bar, and, it's downhill from there. And, a lot of late night Whataburger and some Taco Bell mixed in there, and a lot of drinking and a lot of nights. And I ballooned up even then, but it was like it happened so subtly that I didn't even realize it. And so obviously when I got out of college, and back in the real world, I started looking at myself, and the moment for me happened in a Banana Republic dressing room where I looked at myself and I'm sitting up there with a 1X, 2X shirt. And I was like, I can't live like this anymore. And so, I got with my mentor at the time and I said, look, I can't do this. I was like, I need to do something. He said, when do you want to start? I said, right now. And he said, well, here's some things you need to do. Log your meals, do these different things. I remember going home, I took a green trash bag out and I dumped my entire refrigerator and pantry of everything that no longer needed to be in my life. And I lost my first 43 pounds in 5.5 months. And in total, I lost 68 total. So right now I'm a 31 and a half in the waist. I'm averaging somewhere between 180 and 185 on my weight. And I've never turned back. And I think I'm 10, 12 years on that journey. It just, the moment hit me when you go from a high-end football player to, just ballooning. I just couldn't do it anymore. And of course, now I went from what got me to be able to not be big anymore is what I do now. I teach indoor cycling because that's where my weight started just completely melting off.
That's awesome. That is awesome. I got to say, though, for those that have those mental breakdowns, it's unfortunate to say, but some do not recover from those. So how did you recover? And any advice for those going through that mental stress right now? I mean, we are still, it seems like post-pandemic, there's still some stress going on, and the stress has really come back post-pandemic, if you will. So how do people who may be on the verge of a breakdown or already through it recover from it?
Well, obviously, different breakdowns, whether it's all mental, of course, but whether it's weight loss, whether it's a loss of a loved one, whether it's divorce, whether it's something going on in the market with your job and, the economic uncertainties or just issues, within the family unit. I think the first and foremost thing that you need to do is, for one, I would obviously go get help. Go get some type of help, some type of mental health. Sit down with someone and be able to unpack your thoughts. And that it actually goes to a bigger conversation of, you need a community, right? And I stress this so much. Life is not meant to be lived alone. But after even before the pandemic, it was just like, I did this on my own. It's like there's a badge of courage to say, like, oh, this is all me, which is really a lie, because no one does any part of life alone. There's always somebody who's helping you. There's always a customer who you're needing to serve. There's always possibly a boss. There's always somebody else you're dealing with. But we've taken this idea that it's more joyous or more admirable to like do it on your own, which and of course the pandemic did not do anything to help that. Let's just steal away in our houses, get in these pods and just, finger paint all day and be useless, on some levels. And that really put an attitude into a society of, kind of just stealing away. So I would say get some community, whether it's a community center, whether it's a church, whether it's any of those things, because the bottom line is that you're too close to your situation and you need someone else. And of course that takes some humility, which we're also taught not to do as well. We need to be vulnerable, right? Because we're humans, like we're flawed, like severely flawed. I always openly say those types of things. Sit down with somebody you can trust, friends, a pastor, a minister, a psychologist, psychiatrist. Sit down with someone who has a vested interest in you, right? Hopefully you have family whom you can trust and be able to share some of these things with. But if you don't, find you a mentor, find somebody who can hold you accountable. Like when you're going through these tough times, a mentor or accountability ally, as I like to call them, you need that type of person around so that you don't have to figure it out.
Did you find
Sometimes
that?
You can just, go ahead.
Did you find that in the locker room? Because I love talking about accountability. It's one of my 3 A's this year: accountability, accessibility, and adaptability. But for the accountability, did you find that in your own locker room when you were at Stephen F. Austin, or was it sort of what kind of environment was it like? Did you feel you could be vulnerable with your teammates?
It probably was more in high school than in college. I loved my college football experience. I had a couple of friends on the team, but I wasn't as close with that team as I was with my high school team. I think really for me, aside from the different churches I've been at, a lot of my accountability allies came within the sports arena when I was doing my sports reporting, when I was working for Fox Sports and Scout.com. That group we had, it was called the Midlands Group. Basically, it was Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and New Mexico. That was kind of our portion of the country we covered when we did our rankings. That crew of about 5 to 7 of us, man, we were tight. We could share anything. Like we did life together. And like I said, in addition to my church, I've always kept a couple of good solid people, some go-to people. And and obviously in recent years, probably in the last 12 to 15 years, I've had a mentor, like somebody I could tell different things about, especially once my father left. I needed a man who was, older than me, whom I could, share some certain things with. And since then I've created an entire council around me. Like there's 3 to 5 people who are part of like my own personal and professional board, whom I can, share business ideas with, and they all serve a different role. Some of them serve a more Christian spiritual role in my life. Some of them have the philanthropic service side of my life. I have a business person. And then I have someone who I'm just like, it's kind of a Swiss Army knife. Like they know a little bit of everything, but not an expert in any of it. But just a wise person who can be in my life, whom I can just, have that fatherly advice. And of course, my biological father's still here, and I share things with him as well. That's just been a little bit more of a rocky relationship, which is, rebuilding now that I'm in my 40s. But you need people. And that's the main thing. You need community, you need people, and you need, like you said, accountability. You need someone who's not going to just be a yes man or yes woman to you. somebody who can actually tell you the truth. Because if somebody can't tell you the truth, they're not your friend.
Well, that is a lot to unpack there, and we're going to get into the ministry, but talk about the ministry, because I know that also helps you stay accountable to yourself as well, right? I mean, and that's one of the things you want to highlight. And as someone who does believe we all are, I believe we're here in God's image, and people ask me why did you get a prosthetic or something like that? I said, this is the way God made me, So maybe you feel that way about your own self, Ahmard, as well, that God has you here for a reason.
Absolutely. And at this point in time, I'm almost with full certainty that I know what God's calling on my life is at this point in time. Of course, it takes a lot of getting beat up. We're all somewhat prodigals in the way where, we left the Father's house and squandered everything. And, when it's time to come home, your father runs to you, hugs you, loves you, and gets you back on the path because you've come home. And that's, obviously what I believe I represent. When I look at where I'm at in this point in time now, the ministry has been a very pivotal part of it. Obviously my faith, because faith is what got me out of all of the different things that you've seen from my bio, and I always say death, and divorce, the 3 Ds that nearly destroyed me multiple times. It was the faith. It was my faith in Christ, who never left me, even though I left him many a times. And obviously now I've recognized that, and, I got the scars and receipts to prove it. But the faith aspect of me is the only reason why I wake up every morning, which is why every morning when I wake up, I give thanks for that. And I'm blessed the idea that, someone died for the fact that, I can live the way I'm living right now. My life belongs, to him. And so my job is to make sure and honor that with all of my actions. And so, as I've stated many times before, service, gratitude, and impact are 3 of the primary words that I want to make sure all of my actions throughout the day represent. And so that's a big part of my life. And, I'm living at the level I believe Christ is calling me to be.
Well, yeah, I want to go into those 3 different words, because I know that you base your life, and that's sort of been the foundation for you, hasn't it? Those 3 words you live by. And you have journals that you recommend we fill out as well, right?
That is correct.
So go into that a little bit. So what is the importance of gratitude, service, and impact? Why those 3? Break down each one of them if you can, because I was fascinated when I read that part of your bio as well.
So obviously, gratitude to me is a foundational principle. The idea that regardless of where you are in life, and there can be some pretty rough times, and I only adopted this during the rough times, because sometimes you'll look around and be like, there's nothing going good in my life. Well, the fact that you have life means there's an opportunity. Yes, it might be total carnage around you. And I mean, I'm sure there's someone listening where it's like, yeah, my family situation is messed up. I'm on the verge of divorce, about to lose my job. There's a laundry list of things that go wrong. They say when it rains, it pours. And that could be true at times. And that is where, obviously having faith and leaning on God's understanding and not on your own is huge. And for me, gratitude is the notion that no matter what, I have the opportunity to be alive. And for that alone is a means for me being grateful. Meaning I'm looking at a situation and all the odds are against me. I alone am not enough. So I have to lean on my Father's understanding to be able to get through that. And I'm grateful for the fact that I have life. To me, that alone is enough to be grateful every morning. I am breathing, right?
Amen.
To me. So gratitude is the first and foremost. Service. We are here to serve one another, right? I'm very huge on servant leadership, where the group is more important than the whole. Now, I'm not talking about that from some type of socialistic redistribution type of thing. I'm talking about pure, unadulterated serving the needs of others, right? Because I'm more into private service as opposed to this sort of corporate service. I like the one-on-ones. I like to look at a young man and say, you know what? I want to invest in you. Let's do some things together. Let's sit down and have some tea or coffee, and let's talk about what your future looks like, right? I typically tie 3 to 4 hours a week working with young men, right? Because to me, that is the future. Because if we don't build a bridge to future generations, there is no future, right? And so my service is to pour into not only future generations, but just the people around me, from the standpoint that when you wake up in the morning, if one of your goals is let me try to impact 2 to 3 to 4 lives a day in some kind of way. And I'm not talking about, you need to go out and do these like grand, crazy things. Like, how about a hug and a smile, opening the door for someone, buying a coffee for someone, just asking someone how their day is, checking in on a friend you haven't reached out to in a month, right? Just putting together the service. And of course, there's the bigger things, feeding the homeless, doing all of these other things. But service to others is the foundation of what we have here called life. Because the life we have is not supposed to be just for us, And I know we'll get on this a little bit more, but I'll go ahead and put it out there now. And I'll say it again because it's worth repeating. One of the quotes my father's always said is, live the best life you can, then give it all away. That is something, I don't know, for whatever reason, of all the things he said, he told me that when I was probably like 8 years old. And why I still remember that at this age, who knows? But the fact that it stuck that long lets me know how impactful that is. So that is the service type of thing. And when you take the gratitude and it leads into the service, you create impact, right? When you put those two together and you're going out intentionally to do well for others, of course, starting with your family, but then you extend that out to others. You extend that out and saying, you know what, let me find someone to make life better for them. And when you do that, it makes impact. And and the impact, we always think that we need to do these huge MLK, the type of like big movements or whatever. No, it starts locally. It starts in your community. It starts with your next door neighbor. It starts with people at your church. It starts with people at your school, at your job, just coming in and wanting to be a light for one person at a time.
Amen.
And when you continue to do that, boom, you make some impact. So you can see where, like, every day I want to make sure that those 3 things are driving every action along with my faith.
Because you have that involvement in college football, I was going to post on my sports spotlight because, hey, let's check in on former Stephen of Austin, the cornerback here, Ahmard Vital. So staying on that sports beat with what you've just talked about, does the NIL help student athletes make an impact, or does it make them more selfish? Like, you didn't have that NIL growing up, and I'm sure you would have done differently, but do you feel like the NIL is advantage to building character and having that impact, or a disadvantage?
Man, and I definitely like to take a hard stance on things. I don't like to do it depends, either or. I like to be very, very direct. So I'm going to lean on a coach friend of mine's understanding a little bit more. So while I do think, yes, there needs to be, some level of compensation, I will say, in my opinion, and I am absolutely okay with me seeing this the wrong way, but in my opinion, this is going to do more harm than good. The whole situation with this type of money, because we've always known that college football is sort of NFL 2.0 anyway. It's already kind of been there, because we know that guys have been getting gifts and under the table money for a long time. That's not a secret, right? Just like, back in the day, people knew that the mob was doing certain things, and it's just like, yeah, we know that, but it's like, we're not talking about it yet. Everybody knows. I was talking to a coach friend of mine when this first came out, and he had a player or two who were on this. And he said, Vital, I want to tell you that this is going to be one of the worst things that ever happened to college football. Now, this is an old school gentleman, right? This is not a guy who's my age. This guy's probably closer to 60, right? And I've known him since he was an assistant coach at a D1 school in Texas. And he's been to probably 10 different stops since I've known him. what he was saying is what's going to end up happening. Because you got to think about what bad can happen when you give a 17-year-old $3 million. What could possibly go wrong, right? You know, like the maturity level. Because, well, think about it. Just like, you know, with the agents, when they're going to the NFL and they're trying to choose an agent, like you give a kid that. Now, to be fair, if our family structure as a country was better, this wouldn't be such a problem. If we still had intact homes, this would not be much of a problem because there'd be a family, father, mother, managing these affairs for you and putting you in a good position. But because we have so many broken homes, now that opens the door for less structure. And so I think there's going to be a lot of tax issues that are going to go down. I think there's going to be a lot of conflicts between coaches because it's like, hey, I got to go do this photo shoot. Yeah, but we're supposed to be at practice. Well, push that aside. I do think that there's going to be a level of entitlement, narcissism that's going to just pile on top of what already is, because there already is sort of a weird look at me type of culture that's been brewing in college football for some time. I mean, we've always had guys who are being flashy, but it's like now it's just like almost a lot of things are a look at me type of situation. And you can tell the difference between schools that have a different type of culture than others. I do think that it is good that there is more money and more resources going around, but there also is going to be some trade-offs and some issues that have not been factored in yet, that we have not seen unfold yet, right? And so
I agree. It seems all hunky-dory now, but you never know down the road. I see what you're saying. So I guess what I'm hearing from you, Ahmard, is that you're kind of glad you didn't have that option, only because it might have helped you build your character just living on the meal money, if you will, and whatever else, the scholarship as well. But although I think you mentioned you were a walk-on, but even so, not having the NIL might have helped you build character even more, right? Is that what you're thinking?
Well, I would say if it's going to be directed towards me, it would have been slightly different with me, because I had not one but two fathers, and my dads were no excuse types of dudes. In fact, probably if NIL money would have came in, they probably would have taken every dime of it and gave me $20 and told me to go get a couple of pizzas and we'll manage the rest of this for you. That's probably what would have happened if I was a star football player at that time and I got, $40,000, $50,000 a month coming in. That absolutely is going home. And my folks were doing something productive with it, probably investing it for me and doing some other things like that. So no, I don't think it would have been the same thing. But I always say I'm blessed, man. You
sound very blessed. You sound like you feel very, very
yes.
blessed. Do you preach? So I asked that because when you were going through your gratitude service impact commentary, I felt like I was listening to you on the pulpit. So do you preach, and where can people find you on the pulpit?
I don't preach. I'm just I'm a youth ministry leader at my church here in the Woodlands, Texas, and so I teach Sunday mornings for the Sunday school for our group called Anthem Youth, and I serve on Wednesdays for our Anthem Youth service, which is basically the church service for our teenagers. But people can find me at ahmardvital.com, and obviously all the social media platforms. It's Ahmard Vital, Instagram, Facebook. And Twitter as well. They can find me at all these locations, but ahmardvital.com is the hub, and social media, Facebook, and like I said, Facebook and Instagram are very active at this moment. Just looking to bring some awareness to what's going on with our young people, really. So that's the main thing. Yeah, I'm a ministry leader here, but I'm an advocate for young people, especially young men. Who I'm looking to build more leaders coming into this next wave, this next generation. That's where my calling is, and so that's where people will find me probably 50% of the time doing that type of work, and of course keynote speaking, writing, and speaking in small businesses, universities, and different venues outside of that.
All right, we have a few minutes here. You gotta get into I want to get into the media part of it, because you've written a few books, and you've also you've created That Guy Media Group, and that's the one I'm really curious about. Because do you accept podcasts on That Guy Media Group? How does that work? Like, tell us about that.
So that guy media group is basically the corporation that houses all of my stuff: the writing, the speaking, the consulting, the curriculum building I do for nonprofits. It's just a hub to be able to encapsulate all that I do, because obviously I'm a writer, but I'm also a speaker. I'm a guest on podcasts. I do some ministry work where I'm speaking in that sense as well. I do some CDs and different types of audio mediums all over the place. And so I want to make sure and have that corporation to kind of impose it. And obviously over time, I want to build out that guy media group. I want to have other speakers who are coming along. I got some young men right now doing some video and audio work for me, and I'm hoping to continue to build on that. So that guy media group was built to, one day become, a global force, and something that, where some people can come along and express their love of media and be able to share that with others. And so I want to definitely be on the front end of that as it continues to grow.
And then you wrote a book, or a couple of books, I should say. Tell us about the book that's out that you've written, Ahmard Vital.
Yes, the newest book is Now What? 5 Steps to Get Up and Create the Most of Life, was published in January of 2023, so earlier this year. It really was built on the idea of everything that went down on 2020. I know you made some pandemic references earlier. There was a lot of mess going on during that time, and I just heard a lot of rhetoric, regardless of what side you fall on the political side. I don't care. I could care less about that. But there was a lot of rhetoric that was coming out that was not advantageous to people trying to move forward and do things great in their lives. And so Now What focuses on the idea of, you're looking at a situation that looks pretty terrible, looks pretty bleak, pretty grim. How are you going to get yourself out of this hole? Do you have a flashlight? Do you have a match? Do you have a rope? What do you need? And so Now What focuses on the idea of going through the 5 steps of reflection, decision, planning, action, and seeking, to be able to get yourself, whether it's, starting a new career, launching a business, starting a podcast, writing a book, whatever that point A to point B thing is, or you've been in the criminal justice system, you screwed up a little bit, maybe you went bankrupt. So what is the place from point A to point B? And we go through steps in each of those chapters that are very short chapters with little subtitles, to be able to you can choose the strategy you'd like to use, because there's multiple options for each of them. The different strategies you can use to get yourself out of the place you are and to a new place where you're being, more productive, earning more, and feeling better about this experience you have called life.
I want to know, because I mentioned you sent me a link. Is the public able to get a free copy, or how do they get a copy of your book?
Yes, booknowwhat.com. That's booknowwhat.com. My publisher made digital copies available for those who would like to go read the book, and it is available to them. Hopefully you'll go on one of the 33 different digital platforms and get your own copy. And looking forward to hearing from a number of you all who are looking to make these empowered new moves that are going to be available to you.
One last thing, Ahmard, and thanks so much for the time today. One last thing, though, you discuss about sort of bringing young men into the spiritual, the religious, even the cultural realm. How important is it to steering young men, as you're doing, into work, into making that impact? What's that like for you, and what's that mean? How rewarding is it? And there is an importance of making sure young men are sort of shepherded today, isn't there?
Absolutely, because I don't like to point the finger, but the bottom line is that society has turned everything upside down. We're telling the men to get more softer and stop being leaders and going out and taking charge of things. And we've told women that they don't need men, go out and conquer the world, and basically a whole bunch of Joan of Arcs out here. And what's happened is that society is very confused right now. The young men are confused, the young ladies are confused, and the family unit is being totally decimated. And, I looked at that over time, and I say, you know what? I'll stand in the gap. I'll sit down with my young men. So, because you remember, like, young men are the ones, these are the future leaders. These are the guys who are going to build all these little things that no one thinks about, these roads, the infrastructure, all of these things. And they're going to be head of households. So I sit down with my young men, I mentor them, and I teach them about finance. I teach them about, not family structure. I teach them about, standing up and being leaders, going out and earning what you're supposed to do during this time, what type of suit you need to wear in these different situations. Like all of these little things that, fatherly uncle type of advice that needs to be portrayed to these young men. Some of them even have fathers and they still embrace and love the information. But building up and empowering young men is extremely pivotal, especially during this time when, young men who have leadership and stoic and pragmatic qualities are told they're toxic. They're told that they're too aggressive. They're told that, all of these different things. And it has not worked out well, right? Because there's a lot of young adults between the ages of 17 and 28, even up to 32 years old, who are just confused because they're just like, okay, if I stand up for myself, if I proclaim that this is who I am and this is what I want, society's going to call me this. And I tell them, like, forget that. This is the way life should be lived and the way it should be done. And so I'm more than happy to stand in that place with my young men across the country to help them be able to push through and be the leaders God is calling them to be.
Well, before I let you go, I want to fire our listeners up right now by playing a bit of this. I just found it on your Twitter, and Ahmard Vital, that's a Twitter, Ahmard Vital. And if you want to be a little fired up before this conversation ends, after listening, just listen to Ahmard in person with the group of young men. Where was this? At PWAMU? Where did I see that video? At the top of your Twitter page, Ahmard.
That's probably Prairie View. I did the Hall of Champions. I led off the Hall of Champions series at Prairie View A&M University.
Shall we take a listen before you sign off today?
Go for it.
Give yourself a hand. When Coach brought me in and Phyllis brought me in, they didn't ask me where I had come from. They judged me based on where I am now. So what I want to do is bring you guys from the position you are now and take you to a place where you're empowered to do more with your lives going forward. Somebody say, will to win. Will to win. Will to win. Interesting, I did not say the knowledge to win. I did not say the skill to win. I didn't even say the talent to win. I said the will to win. And guys, really what will comes down to is a choice. It's effort. It's a yearning to be better, to do better, to have better, to be able to serve at a greater capacity. This is your image test. We started with what fuels you. This is your image test. And here's what I want to share with you guys. The opinion you have of you is the only one that matters.
Love it, Ahmard. Love that you're pumping up the young men there. And can people actually book you for speaking engagements like that?
Absolutely. At ahmardvital.com, there's a pre-event questionnaire, or they can send me an email directly at info@ahmardvital.com. We're making some moves. We're actually prepping to hit the road next week. Actually, I'm looking at next week or the week after next. It's kind of all running together, but we're hitting the road, and we're going to do some work with a couple of sports teams and a women's group out there in West Texas. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, please come back as the season progresses, as your leadership tour, if you will, progresses. And thanks for the time today. I look forward to having you back on the Alex Garrett Sports Spotlight.
Alex, thank you for having me on, and thank all your listeners for tuning in.
And one more time, thanks to Podmatch for making this connection here on the Alex Garrett Podcast Network.